So genetics is also something that, if we can call it a science, is a science that for the most part has been used against Africans. It's a science that's come about from European and European American men who have tried to work out why things do and act the way that they do. People like Charles Darwin, before him John Frederick Blumenbach, before him Francis Berniers, even Francis Bacon in the 17th century. These people were trying to reduce nature to scientific calculus or scientific equations. Francis Bacon in the 17th century talks about the experimentation of science, the idea that there was something beyond what was written in the Bible, that the Bible only provided us with a theoretical religious understanding, but mankind, using Aristotle, Plato, or the science of Greeks, which we know comes from Egypt, but the science of Greece, to didactically separate and divide all phenomenon so that it can have a scientific equation. And by understanding the scientific equation, we could therefore understand how things work. And by understanding how things work, we can then predict how things work. And then we can change how things work. So I, for example, always talk about one of the early scientists in Europe that very few people talk about. His name is Capability Brown. Lancelot Capability Brown is a very important scientist, although he's not often spoken about as such. Lancelot Capability Brown, in the 17th century, wanted to design the perfect garden. He was a landscape gardener. And he wanted to figure out what makes certain flowers grow there and certain flowers grow there. Oh, I have white roses over here and red roses over here, but I want a pink flower. I want a pink rose. How do I get this pink rose? Oh, then I will mix the white with the red. How can I do that? How do I mix two flowers that are separate? So he began to mix. He began to think about genetics and work out equations for why things do the way that they do. And he did this in nature with gardens, flowers, shrubs, and things that grow. Charles Darwin, Origin of Species, applied similar philosophy much later on to why certain animals habit certain places and why certain species resemble each other but are slightly different. Why is the tiger similar to the lion but different? Why does the mountain lion in certain parts of America have a certain shape, but the lion on the plains of Africa have a different shape? He did this by studying birds, for example, in the Galapagos Islands. And he wanted to work out why particular birds have a shape of bill. Why is their beak shaped in a certain way? And he said, oh, this must be for reasons of survival. And that they have developed these characteristics step by step through selective breeding. He wanted to reduce this down to a scientific equation. He was not the first to do this. Someone such as Francis Bernier in the 17th century said that all of the human family owe their origins to particular colors. He traced this to the Greek theory of the four humours, that there are four humours and four colors: white, red, black, yellow. This theory is still with us now, and why people refer to themselves as white, black, red, and yellow. Of course, people aren't really white, black, red, or yellow. People may have a variation of colors, but they're not uniformly black, certainly not uniformly white, certainly not uniformly red, and certainly not uniformly yellow. So it's a nonsense. But the idea was that these four colors related to aspects of the human condition. And by tracing these four humours, you could work out the characteristics. So, for example, if you were red, you'd be hot, phlegmatic, and aggressive. If you were white, you'd be sanguine, etc. That's the idea. So These ideas gave birth to characteristics, the characteristics associated with the color associated with a particular race. However, Francis Burney wasn't necessarily about attributing positivity or negativity to any particular race, but merely to state that these are the characteristics associated with each particular race. John Frederick Blumenbach in the 18th century, who was a friend of Alado Equiano, that's another point which we don't have probably time to dwell on. John Frederick Blumenbach tried to make this into a science and said that the white race is industrious, creative, imaginative, etc. The black race is such and such, the red race is such and such, and the yellow race is such and such. These characteristics, he said to say that there are 4 distinct races, not one human race, but 4 distinct races, and that these distinct races have characteristics which are immutable. In other words, can't be changed. But if you mix the races, those immutable characteristics become mutable, changeable, because you produced, inverted commas, a hybrid. A hybrid being someone of various different ethnicities. However, the thinking of Blumenbach and Nietzsche, another German writer who's talking about the superior man, the creation of the superior man, which actually gave rise to Nazism, those people have failed to understand the human history even of Europe. Because even in Europe, people of African descent, Asian descent, and other non-white descent have been present for thousands of years. The genetic bloodline of these people are intermixed into the European bloodline. In the continent of Africa, not everywhere in the continent of Africa, but certainly in North, East, West, and South, that has also taken place in the continent of Africa. In America, the mixing has been continuous, and certainly in the so-called Caribbean, South America, Asia, Australasia, etc., that mixing has been continuous. There is no, inverted commas, pure blood. Probably never has been. The fact of this means that these characteristics, even if they did exist, are all mutable because of the fact of what has happened. But that's not necessarily what they were about. These categories and these scientific ideas were about creating superiority and inferiority. It was about creating the idea and justifying the idea of European colonialism and imperialism. It was about providing a scientific evaluation to support the religious one, to prove that the European through manifest destiny, John O'Sullivan, 1805, that the European was meant to inherit and rule the earth and provide a scientific justification for it, not just merely a religious one. So as people became more secular and began to believe less that the Bible and what was written in the Bible was the immutable truth, science stepped in to provide one more justification for racism. This justification was that by science, the European was meant to be superior. Science had ordained the white man with a burden, and the burden was to carry the world on their back, to bring truth and knowledge to the world. They were the inheritors of the earth, and the earth was their legacy. Certainly, that provided fuel to the fire of colonialism, and as Europeans went to North America, raped, killed, dominated, lied to, and committed genocide, I said genocide, against native peoples, as they did the same in the so-called Caribbean islands, as they did the same in South America, as they did the same in Oceania, as they tried to do the same in Asia, as they did the same in large parts of the continent of Africa, and how they did the same in places like the Arctic, which we don't often talk about, and as they did the same even in Europe, with many sets of non-white peoples who were present there and had been present there for thousands of years. So this ethnic cleansing of the planet needed to be justified. Otherwise, there's a great deal of emotional and spiritual guilt. There's a great deal of emotional and spiritual guilt unless it can be justified. Science provided that justification. Science provided the support for that kind of notion. So in themselves, people like Darwin and Blumenbach were not necessarily the scientific racists that we now say that they are or were. Other people that came later, in the latter part of the 19th and the early 20th century, certainly were. Those Nazi scientists, Goebbels and others, who were doing scientific experiments on Africans in Namibia, slicing off the heads of Africans whilst they were still alive to see if the African felt pain, carrying out sexual tests on the Heroan and Namquara people to see if through the process of rape they could produce a white-skinned German Afro-European. This type of, inverted commas, quasi-science gave birth to the scientific racism of the Nazis. Those experiments gave rise to the hierarchy of races, in which the African was less than human. Intermession, or Untermession, the filth, and other people of, inverted commas, Semitic blood were higher up, but nevertheless filth. And the Aryan, so-called Aryan, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, so-called Aryan, would be the superior master of the universe, and that the whole world was theirs. So this fueled, or was a kind of hyper-nationalism that fed off the nationalism and Eurocentrism of European nationalism during its colonial imperial conquest. People like Cecil Rhodes had a sort of idea like this when he committed the genocide that he did in Africa. In the Congo, Leopold, when he committed genocide of millions of Africans in the 19th century, did this on the justification that Belgium needed those resources and that the African was expendable because they were an inferior breed of people, genetically inferior. Yeah, but do we believe it? Do we as African people believe it?